Well, yeah, actually I went to school here at ASU many years ago and really enjoyed my experience and loved the mountains and decided to stay. It's such a wonderful place.
For years, Eustace Conway has been known as the ultimate survivalist, a man who rejected modern comforts to live deep in the wilderness, relying on nature, discipline, and sheer willpower to survive. To viewers, he appeared unbreakable, fearless, almost mythical. But behind that rugged image lies a story his family rarely spoke about, until now in a deeply emotional revelation. Members of Eustace Conway's family have finally opened up about what truly happened far from civilization. Moments so intense and frightening that they still struggle to talk about them today. These weren't scenes captured by cameras or edited for television. This was real life unfolding in isolation, where help was miles away and every decision carried serious consequences. According to his family, there were times when Eustace pushed himself beyond human limits. Situations where survival wasn't guaranteed. Moments when the wilderness he loved so deeply nearly took everything from him. What they reveal now paints a very different picture, one of fear, silence, and choices that left lasting emotional scars. This is not just a story about survival. It's about the cost of choosing isolation, the toll it takes on loved ones, and the heartbreaking moments his family endured while the world believed Eustace was living freely and fearlessly. What happened deep in the wilderness was far more serious than fans ever knew, and once you hear the full story, you'll never see Eustace Conway the same way again. Long before cameras followed him into the mountains, Eustace Conway had already made a decision that would shape every part of his life. He chose the wilderness, not as a temporary escape, but as a permanent way of being. To Eustace, modern life felt restrictive, disconnected, and artificial. Nature, on the other hand, offered truth, simplicity, survival on honest terms. What many people saw as hardship, he viewed as freedom. From a young age, Eustace rejected comfort. He trained his body to endure pain, hunger, and exhaustion. He learned ancient skills, fire making, shelter building, foraging, not as hobbies, but as necessities. Over time, this dedication turned him into a living symbol of self-reliance. To the outside world, he seemed fearless, almost superhuman. But to his family, his choices sparked a very different emotion. Constant worry. Eustace didn't just live near the wilderness, he lived inside it. Remote locations, harsh weather, limited contact, days, sometimes weeks, without communication. His family remembers the silence as the hardest part. No phone calls, no confirmation that he was safe, just the knowledge that he was out there, alone, facing dangers most people never encountered. As his reputation grew, so did the distance between Eustace and those who loved him. His commitment to his lifestyle left little room for compromise. Family gatherings were missed. Milestones passed quietly. Conversations became brief and rare, while viewers admired his independence. His family struggled with a sense of emotional absence, loving someone they could not reach. What made things more painful was Eustace's refusal to show vulnerability. He rarely spoke about injuries, close calls, or moments of fear. If something went wrong, he dealt with it himself. That silence, his family now admits, created an invisible wall. They sensed danger but had no details. They felt fear but no reassurance. Behind the scenes, there were already warning signs. Minor injuries that could have been serious. Extreme weather events that nearly trapped him. Physical strain that took a toll on his body over time. Each incident deepened his family's anxiety, yet Eustace continued forward, driven by a belief that stepping back would mean betraying his principles. His family describes a growing realization that the wilderness wasn't just a place Eustace lived, it was something that demanded everything from him: time, health, relationships, and slowly, they began to fear that one day, it might demand his life. They recall moments when news reached them late, an accident mentioned casually, an illness brushed off, a dangerous situation minimized. Those moments lingered. The tears didn't come immediately. They came later, in private, when the weight of what could have happened finally settled in. What viewers didn't see was the emotional cost paid by those waiting at home. the sleepless nights, the imagined worst-case scenarios, the helplessness of loving someone who believed isolation was strength. His family never doubted his skill, but skill they knew doesn't make someone invincible. As Eustace pushed deeper into the wilderness, the risks grew more serious. And eventually, something happened that changed everything. An incident so intense that it forced his family to confront a reality they had long feared but never spoken aloud. In the next part, they reveal the moment when admiration turned into pure terror, and why the wilderness they once respected suddenly became their greatest fear. For years, Eustace Conway's family lived with quiet anxiety, but nothing prepared them for the moment when fear became unavoidable. It didn't arrive with a dramatic announcement or an urgent phone call. Instead, it came through fragmented information, pieces of a story that slowly formed a terrifying picture. Something had gone wrong deep in the wilderness, far beyond the reach of immediate help. According to his family, Eustace had pushed himself into one of the most remote and unforgiving stretches he had ever attempted. Harsh terrain, unpredictable weather, limited supplies. It was the kind of challenge he had faced before, but this time, conditions shifted faster than expected. What began as a routine survival stretch turned into a dangerous fight against exhaustion, injury, and isolation. At some point, Eustace suffered a serious physical setback. Details were kept vague at first, partly because he minimized what had happened. That was his way. He believed acknowledging vulnerability would weaken his resolve. But as days passed, it became clear that this was not something he could simply walk off. Movement became difficult. Pain worsened, and the wilderness offered no mercy. His family recalls the dread of realizing how far away he was from assistance. No nearby roads, no quick rescue, just miles of rough land and a man determined to endure rather than retreat. They described the helplessness of knowing that even if they wanted to help, they couldn't reach him in time. When word finally reached them that Eustace was injured and struggling, emotions overflowed. Fear replaced admiration. Silence became unbearable. His family remembers waiting, not knowing if he would recover on his own or if the situation would escalate into something irreversible. Every hour felt heavy. Every unanswered update fueled panic. What made the situation even more painful was Eustace's refusal to ask for help. His lifelong belief in self-reliance worked against him. Even as his condition worsened, he hesitated to leave the wilderness or accept outside assistance. To his family, this was the moment when dedication crossed into danger. They now admit that tears came not just from fear, but from frustration. They loved his strength, but they also saw how stubbornness placed him at risk. The wilderness he respected had turned into an adversary, testing not just his survival skills, but his limits as a human being. Eventually, circumstances forced a turning point. Whether through worsening pain, physical collapse, or sheer exhaustion, Eustace reached a moment where continuing alone was no longer possible. That realization, his family says, was heartbreaking, because it meant acknowledging that even the strongest survivalist has boundaries. The aftermath was quiet but heavy. Recovery didn't happen overnight. Physical healing took time, and emotional scars lingered longer. For the first time, Eustace's family saw the reality behind the legend. Not a symbol of endurance, but a man who had come frighteningly close to losing everything he valued. What haunted them most was how close they came to never hearing his voice again. The wilderness had nearly claimed him, and no amount of skill could erase that truth. From that point forward, their relationship with his lifestyle changed. Support remained, but it was now layered with fear and caution. This incident became a dividing line in Eustace's story. Before it, the wilderness represented freedom without consequence. After it, the cost became undeniable. His family began asking difficult questions about risk, responsibility, and how much sacrifice survival was truly worth. They reveal how this near tragedy reshaped their bond with Eustace, and why the emotional damage ran deeper than the physical injury ever could. The physical danger. Eustace Conway survived was only part of the story. What followed was far more difficult to confront, the emotional impact left behind in its wake. For his family, the wilderness incident didn't end when Eustace made it back. It lingered in conversations that never happened, in fears that couldn't be dismissed, and in a new understanding of how close they came to losing him forever. For the first time, Eustace's family began speaking openly about the strain his lifestyle placed on their relationship. They had always respected his independence, but now that respect was mixed with grief for the emotional distance it created. Loving someone who consistently chooses isolation, they admitted, feels like mourning a person who is still alive. Eustace himself struggled with the aftermath in ways few people noticed. Accustomed to physical resilience, he was unprepared for the weight of guilt. Knowing how much pain his family endured forced him to reflect on the consequences of his choices. This wasn't the wilderness testing him, it was the people he loved asking him. Silently, to stay. Family members described moments when emotions surfaced unexpectedly. Simple conversations became tense. Long silences carried meaning. The incident had broken the illusion that his way of life only affected him. Every risk he took echoed through his family, shaping their fears, their trust, and their sense of security. What hurt the most was the realization that they had normalized danger. Over the years, they had learned to accept long absences and vague reassurances as normal. The incident shattered that coping mechanism. It forced them to admit that they had been living in constant quiet fear and calling it acceptance. Eustace, meanwhile, faced an internal conflict. His identity had been built around self-sufficiency and endurance. Acknowledging the emotional cost of that identity felt like surrender. Yet ignoring it meant risking further damage to the relationships that mattered most. The wilderness had always given him clarity, but now clarity came from confrontation. This period marked a subtle shift. Not an abandonment of his principles, but a reevaluation of their limits. Eustace became more aware of how silence could be harmful, not protective. Sharing fear didn't weaken him, it humanized him. And that realization, his family says, changed the way they related to one another. There were difficult conversations. Tears that had been held back for years finally surfaced. His family spoke about nights spent imagining the worst. About the helplessness of waiting without answers. About how strength, when taken too far, becomes distance. These weren't accusations, they were truths that needed air. The wilderness, once a shared source of pride, now carried emotional weight. Every new journey sparked concern. Every delay triggered memories. Trust had to be rebuilt, not in Eustace's skills, but in his willingness to acknowledge risk. His family didn't ask him to give up his life, only to recognize theirs within it. What emerged was a fragile balance. Support mixed with boundaries. Admiration paired with honest fear. Eustace's story, they realized, wasn't just about survival, it was about connection. And how easily it can fray when one person carries all the risk alone. By facing these emotions, something unexpected happened. The family grew closer, not through shared experiences in the wilderness, but through vulnerability. The incident that nearly broke them also forced honesty, and honesty became a form of healing. They explain how this experience reshaped Eustace's future, and why the wilderness no longer holds the same meaning it once did. After everything that happened, Eustace Conway did not abandon the wilderness, but his relationship with it was permanently changed. The near tragedy forced a reckoning, not with nature itself, but with the way he had defined strength for most of his life. Survival was no longer just about enduring alone. It became about knowing when endurance turns into risk. His family noticed the change before he ever spoke about it. He became more deliberate, more open. The silence that once surrounded his journeys began to soften. Where there were once vague reassurances, there were now explanations. Not dramatic confessions, just honesty. And for his family, that honesty meant everything. The wilderness, once a symbol of absolute freedom, now carried reminders of vulnerability. Eustace understood that loving isolation doesn't eliminate responsibility. Every step he took into remote terrain affected people who cared deeply about him. Acknowledging that didn't weaken his connection to nature, it grounded it. His family admits that fear never fully disappeared. Every expedition still brings concern. But the difference now is communication. Boundaries were established. Expectations clarified. The wilderness no longer felt like a rival stealing him away. It became something they could respect again. Even if cautiously, Eustace himself began speaking differently about survival. He emphasized preparation over bravado, awareness over endurance. He no longer framed suffering as proof of strength, but as a warning sign to be understood. That shift, his family says, likely saved him from repeating the same dangerous patterns. What the wilderness took was illusion, the belief that one person can truly exist without consequence. What it gave back was perspective. Eustace emerged with a deeper understanding that survival is not measured only by how long you last alone, but by how well you preserve the connections that give life meaning. There is no dramatic ending, no final escape from danger, just a man continuing forward with humility instead of defiance. For his family, that is enough. They don't ask him to change who he is, only how he carries the weight of his choices. Looking back, they describe the incident as both terrifying and transformative. Tears were shed not just for what almost happened, but for what was finally understood. The wilderness tested Eustace's body, but it tested his relationships even more. Today, Eustace Conway stands as something different than the myth viewers once saw. Still strong, still independent, but now visibly human. And that humanity, his family believes, is his greatest survival skill of all. The story they shared wasn't meant to shock. It was meant to explain. To remind others that even the most capable individuals have limits, and that acknowledging those limits isn't failure, it's wisdom. In the end, the wilderness didn't defeat Eustace Conway, but it demanded a truth he could no longer ignore, that survival is not just about staying alive. It's about making sure the people who love you don't lose you along the way.